The loneliest man in the world was driving through Memphis at midnight when he heard the one voice that could heal his broken heart. But it should have been impossible. It was August 14th, 1976, exactly 19 years to the day since Gladys Presley had died in Elvis's arms at Baptist Memorial Hospital. Elvis couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't find peace anywhere. The anniversary of his mother's death always hit him like a freight train, but this year felt different. This year felt final. Elvis had been driving aimlessly through Memphis for 3 hours, trying to escape the ghosts that haunted Graceland. He was alone in his black Cadillac, having dismissed his bodyguards earlier that evening. He needed to be alone with his grief, alone with the crushing weight of loss that threatened to swallow him whole. The radio was turned off. The air conditioning hummed quietly. The only sound was the gentle whisper of tires on asphalt as Elvis drove through neighborhoods where normal people were sleeping peacefully in their beds. But Elvis wasn't normal people. He was the most famous man in the world, and he had never felt more alone. As Elvis turned onto a quiet residential street in South Memphis, something impossible happened. Through his closed windows, over the sound of his engine, he heard a voice singing, "He Knows My Name," a gospel song his mother used to sing to him when he was a child. But this wasn't just any voice. This was Gladys Presley's voice, soft, sweet, with that slight Mississippi accent that had comforted Elvis through every childhood nightmare and adolescent heartbreak. Elvis slammed on the brakes so hard that his car skidded sideways before coming to a stop in the middle of the empty street. His hands were shaking as he turned off the engine, certain that grief had finally driven him completely insane. The voice was coming from a small white church on the corner, Mount Olive Baptist Church, a tiny congregation that Elvis had never noticed before despite driving these streets for years. Elvis sat in his car, trembling, as the voice continued singing. It was definitely his mother's voice. He would know it anywhere, but Gladys had been dead for 19 years. This was impossible. "I'm losing my mind," Elvis whispered to himself. "I'm finally losing my mind." But the voice was so clear, so real, so achingly familiar, that Elvis found himself getting out of his car and walking toward the church like a man in a trance. The front door of Mount Olive Baptist Church was unlocked. As Elvis pushed it open, the singing grew louder, more distinct. It was definitely coming from inside the sanctuary. The church was small and simple, wooden pews, a modest altar, and stained glass windows that caught the streetlight from outside. But what Elvis saw made him question everything he thought he knew about life and death. There, standing at the altar with her back to him, was a young black woman in a simple white dress. She was singing "He Knows My Name" in a voice so identical to Gladys Presley's that Elvis felt his knees buckle. The woman turned around when she heard Elvis enter, and her eyes widened in shock when she recognized him. But she didn't scream or faint like most people did when they saw Elvis Presley unexpectedly. Instead, she simply smiled with a warmth that reminded Elvis painfully of his mother. "Presley," she said softly, "I've been expecting you." Elvis stared at her, unable to speak. The woman was young, plaid, maybe 25 years old, with kind eyes and a gentle manner that seemed to radiate peace. "I'm Grace Washington," she continued. "I'm the choir director here. I was just practicing for tomorrow's service when you arrived." "Your voice," Elvis managed to whisper. "How is it possible? You sound exactly like your mother." Grace finished gently. "I know. People have been telling me that my whole life." Grace led Elvis to the front pew and sat down beside him. In the dim light of the church, she seemed to glow with an inner peace that Elvis hadn't felt in years. "I've been singing since I was 3 years old," Grace explained. "My grandmother always said I had an old soul and an angel's voice. But it wasn't until I heard recordings of your mother singing in church that people started saying we sounded alike." Elvis looked at her with tears streaming down his face. "She's been gone for 19 years today. It's been exactly 19 years, and I still can't breathe without her." Grace reached over and took Elvis's hand with a gentleness that reminded him so much of Gladys that it almost broke him completely. "Tell me about her," Grace said softly. For the next hour, in that tiny church at 1 a.m., Elvis told Grace things he had never told another living soul. He talked about how his mother was his best friend, his confidant, his anchor in a world that had gone crazy around him. He told her about the crushing guilt he felt about his mother's death, how he believed that the stress of his fame and the pills she took to cope with that stress had killed her. He talked about the loneliness that had consumed him for 19 years, the feeling that half of his soul had been buried with Gladys in Forest Hill Cemetery. Grace listened without judgment, without trying to fix him or comfort him with empty platitudes. She just listened with the kind of understanding that Elvis had been searching for his entire adult life. When Elvis finished talking, Grace stood up and walked back to the altar. "There's a song your mother used to sing," she said. "I learned it from one of the old recordings from your church in Tupelo. Would you like me to sing it for you?" Elvis nodded, not trusting his voice. Grace closed her eyes and began singing, "Precious Lord, take my hand," the same song Gladys had sung at Elvis's bedside whenever he was sick as a child. But something miraculous happened as Grace sang. Her voice began to change, becoming even more like Gladys's voice than before. It was as if the spirit of Elvis's mother was flowing through this young woman, reaching across the veil between life and death to comfort her son. As Grace sang, Elvis felt something he hadn't experienced since his mother's death. Peace. The crushing weight of grief that had been suffocating him for 19 years began to lift, replaced by a warmth that seemed to emanate from Grace's voice. But it was more than just her voice. Elvis could swear he felt his mother's presence in that church, not as a ghost or a memory, but as a living, loving force that surrounded him with the unconditional love he had been missing for so long. When Grace finished singing, the church fell silent except for the sound of Elvis weeping. Not with grief this time, but with relief and gratitude. "She wants you to know something," Grace said quietly, her eyes still closed. "She wants you to know that she's proud of you, that she's never left your side, and that it's time for you to stop carrying the guilt of her death." Elvis looked at Grace sharply. "How could you possibly know that?" Grace opened her eyes and smiled with a sadness that seemed too deep for someone so young. "Because I lost my mother too, Mr. Presley. And sometimes when we're in the deepest pain, God sends us exactly what we need to heal." Elvis and Grace talked until sunrise, sharing stories about their mothers, their faith, and their music. Grace told him about growing up poor in South Memphis, about finding her voice in church, about the way music had saved her from despair just as it had saved him. "Your mother's voice lives on through your music," Grace said as the first rays of dawn filtered through the stained glass windows. "Every time you sing with love, with passion, with truth, that's her singing through you." For the first time in 19 years, Elvis felt like he could breathe again. What happened next surprised even Elvis himself. Instead of leaving and never looking back, he asked Grace if he could come to the Sunday service later that morning. "I want to hear you sing again," he said. "I want to feel that peace again." Grace smiled. "You're welcome here any time, Mr. Presley. This is God's house, and you're God's child. When Elvis returned to Mount Olive Baptist Church at 11 a.m., he created a sensation. Word had somehow spread that Elvis Presley might be coming to service, and the tiny church was packed beyond capacity. But Elvis didn't come as a celebrity that morning. He came as a broken man seeking healing, and that's exactly what he found. When Grace led the choir in Amazing Grace, Elvis stood up and began singing along. His voice, strengthened by the peace he had found the night before, soared above the congregation in a way that moved everyone to tears. What happened next became the stuff of legend in Memphis gospel circles. Grace invited Elvis to join her at the front of the church, and together they sang "Precious Lord, Take My Hand," the same song Grace had sung to him at midnight. As their voices blended together, something magical occurred. The congregation began to sing along, but softly, respectfully, creating a harmony that seemed to lift the roof off the tiny church. In that moment, Elvis felt his mother's presence more strongly than he had since the day she died. It was as if Gladys was singing through both of them, her voice multiplied and magnified by the love in that room. After the service, Grace pulled Elvis aside and told him something that changed his entire perspective on his mother's death. "I had a dream about your mother last night," Grace said. "She came to me and told me to tell you something. She said that she didn't die because of your fame or your success. She died because her heart was too big for this world, and God needed her voice in heaven." Elvis stared at Grace, feeling the last of his guilt melting away. "She also said," Grace continued, "that every time you use your gift to bring joy to others, every time you sing from your heart, you're doing exactly what she raised you to do." Before Elvis left Mount Olive Baptist Church that day, he made a promise to Grace and to his mother's memory. He promised to stop hiding from his pain and start using his music to heal, not just himself, but others who were hurting. "I want to help you expand this church," Elvis told Grace. "I want to help you reach more people with that voice, with that gift." And he kept that promise. Over the next year, Elvis quietly funded renovations to Mount Olive Baptist Church, bought new instruments for the choir, and established a music program for local children. Elvis never spoke publicly about his experience at Mount Olive Baptist Church, but those close to him noticed a profound change. The crushing depression that had consumed him for years began to lift. He started writing new music again, fresh spiritual songs that carried a depth of emotion he had never achieved before. Grace Washington became one of Elvis's closest friends and spiritual advisors. She was one of the few people who could reach him during his darkest moments, who could remind him of the peace he had found in that little church. On August 16, 1977, exactly 1 year after his midnight encounter with Grace, Elvis gave his final performance at the Market Square Arena in Indianapolis. The last song he sang on stage was "Can't Help Falling in Love," but witnesses say he dedicated it to the angel who gave me back my mother's voice. 2 weeks later, Elvis was found dead at Graceland, but Grace Washington always insisted that Elvis didn't die of a broken heart. He died of a heart that had finally healed enough to let go. Today, Mount Olive Baptist Church still stands on that corner in South Memphis. Grace Washington, now in her 70s, still leads the choir every Sunday, and her voice still carries that otherworldly quality that reminded Elvis so much of his mother. There's a small plaque inside the church that reads, "In memory of Gladys Love Presley, whose voice of love continues to comfort broken hearts." August 14th, 1958. Forever in our songs. Every year on the anniversary of Gladys's death, Grace sings "Precious Lord, Take My Hand" during the evening service. And every year, visitors say they can hear two voices singing, Grace's earthly voice and another voice, sweet and gentle, that seems to come from somewhere beyond this world. The story of Elvis and Grace reminds us that healing can come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes when we're at our lowest point, when we think we can't go on, the universe sends us exactly what we need to find peace. Elvis found his mother's voice in a stranger's song. He found healing in a tiny church. He found hope in the kindness of a young woman who understood his pain because she had walked that same path of loss. The love between a mother and child never really dies. It just transforms, finding new ways to reach us when we need it most. Some people say that what happened in Mount Olive Baptist Church that night was just a coincidence. That Grace Washington happened to have a voice similar to Gladys Presley's, and Elvis's grief-stricken mind made connections that weren't really there. But Grace Washington knows better. She knows that some voices carry more than just sound. The saint, they carry love, healing, and the promise that death is not the end of connection. I may have been the one singing that night, Grace says with a smile that still radiates the same peace Elvis found in her church. But I wasn't singing alone. I was just the vessel. The voice belonged to a mother who never stopped loving her son. And maybe that's all any of us really need. The knowledge that love transcends death, that the voices of those we've lost can still reach us when we need them most, and that healing is always possible, even in our darkest hour. Because sometimes the most profound miracles happen not in front of thousands of screaming fans, but in tiny churches at midnight, where broken hearts can finally learn to sing again. This incredible story of love, loss, and spiritual healing shows us that comfort can come from the most unexpected sources. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe for more amazing tales of how music and faith can heal even the deepest wounds. Share this video with someone who needs to know that love never truly dies. Have you ever experienced a moment that felt like a message from someone you've lost? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to ring that notification bell for more inspiring true stories.